How's everyone doing today? This is Dervin, your co-host with Synonyms of Sound.
And this is your second co-host, Tony. And I have the pleasure of introducing Debbie Bornstein Holinstat. She's one of the authors of the Survivors Clubs. How's it going, Debbie?
Good. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Thank you for being on the show. And here, guys, this is a quick clip of her book. Amazing book. You should definitely read. One of the lucky people that was able to get it signed. It was signed for my wife, but I'm just going to take the credit that I got it signed myself. But amazing book. Definitely recommend reading it. So before we jump into this, Debbie, how are you doing today in general?
I'm good. It's Thanksgiving weekend while we're recording this, and as such, I am counting my blessings this weekend, and there are many of them. So I'm doing good. Thank you. How are you?
Awesome. I'm doing great. Thanksgiving was amazing. Turkey was great. Food was great. As you can see, I'm in a little cabin behind me because I'm in Maine, but I had a good Thanksgiving. Dervin, how was your Thanksgiving?
It was good. It's been a long time since, at least it feels like that, since so much family in one place. So growing family at that, got some siblings, having kids now. So that was different. But definitely a good time. Well-needed weekend that always seems to not be long enough, unfortunately. But
yes, I agree. Sure. I agree. So Debbie, how did the journey of the Survivors Club start? And I guess it's an amazing title for a book, and I would love to know the story behind the title as well. But how did the book start?
So Survivors Club is the story of not just my dad's survival from Auschwitz, but of so many of his family members' survival. And when I first started writing it, the plan was just to write, honestly, my dad's story. It was something I'd thought about doing since I was young. I always knew my dad was a Holocaust survivor. There's the tattoo on his arm. I don't remember a time I didn't know, but I also don't remember a time I didn't know that you don't ask about it. It was something my dad didn't talk about. I knew if other people asked that he quickly deflected. And so it was just sort of a part of him and a part of my family history that we didn't touch. And many years later, I think it was around 2012, the oldest grandchild, my dad now has 12, my mom and dad have 12 grandchildren, but the oldest.
Oh my God.
Yeah. The oldest started asking questions. And as much as my three siblings and I, when we were growing up, if we even touched the subject, my dad would change, just talk about something else. It wasn't something he wanted to talk about.
Uh-huh.
My dad never says no to his grandkids. So he started talking. And my nephew, Jake, oldest grandchild, said to his papa, I'm doing a mitzvah project. That's like a good deed kind of a project. He said, and for my project, I want you to come to my school and I want you to teach people about the Holocaust. And again, Papa never says no. So suddenly he did. He went and he spoke, but he had limited information. My dad was 4.5 when he stepped out of Auschwitz, when Soviets liberated him. And he had, he did have family members there with him. So he has pieces of the story, but it was missing a lot. And I had asked my dad many times over my life, could I research and could I maybe write his story with him? And he said, no. And suddenly he said, you know what, let's explore this. And
Got it.
You can Google anything now. So we Googled Children Liberation Auschwitz, and we went searching for this photo that's here on the front of the book. It's a picture of a little boy that most people have seen over the years, a little boy in Soviet footage rolling up his sleeve and showing his tattoo to the cameras. And we went looking for that. And it took us to a bunch of thumbnails. They all looked just like that. And it said, do you, we clicked on one and it said, do you want to visit the site? We said, yes. And it took us to something called the Cadeau Revisionist Forum. It's a Holocaust deniers website. And it captioned that image of my father. This shows the lies that Jews have been telling that children were killed on arrival in Auschwitz. It captioned another photo of my father that is used actually on the back of the book. Pretty healthy children for a, quote, death camp. That's inside.
I have it on this one.
On the back of the hardcover, exactly. It says grandmother Dora carrying him out of Auschwitz. And
got it.
That was fuel for my dad. And he felt strong. If the Holocaust deniers are talking, it was time. He needed to talk.
So you mentioned something about lies. So you mentioned saying that a lot of stories were saying that when kids arrived, they were killed immediately. So that isn't accurate. Is that what you're saying?
It's not completely
That's what,
accurate. The average lifespan for a child my dad's age was 2 weeks at Auschwitz. So it is true that most
got it. Okay.
died pretty darn fast. And at this point in the war, actually, this was July of 1944 when he entered. Most kids did go right to the gas chambers.
Wow.
We have spent a lot of time and spoken to a lot of historians around the world trying to understand why my dad. He wasn't a twin. Twins were kept alive often to be experimented on. So one could be the control group and one could be the experimentee.
Wow.
There were some kids that were strong enough to do work. There were reasons to keep kids there. But we've tried to understand at that point in the war why my dad was given a number. It was one of the last numbers given out at Auschwitz, we were told, why he was given a number and why he was put in a children's bunk. And to be honest with you, the answer is almost universal across the board. Historians look at us and they call it a miracle. So that's one thing I can't completely answer, why he was selected to be put in a children's bunk. Only 52 children under the age of 8 survived Auschwitz, and my father was one of them. And we've sort of had to accept over the years that there's some details we will never know. And historians fill those in by saying there is a miracle aspect here.
Got it. Okay.
And you asked why it's called Survivors Club. Do you want me to?
Yeah, that would be great. That would be awesome. Yep, still recording, yes. So, yes. Why the name Survivors Club?
We had so many different names. I had this long list of ideas for the book. And I kept going back to Survivors Club for one reason. This is not just my father's story. I am so lucky that so many relatives were so gracious and shared pieces of their story with me. But one of the biggest miracles of all laid out in this book is the fact that my dad's mom, my grandma Sophie, who survived Auschwitz as well, she had 6 brothers and sisters before the war. Her oldest sister was in Warsaw, trekked across Siberia, was saved ultimately by a famous Japanese statesman, Chuni Sugihara, and made it all the way to Japan. Her littlest sister was in the Warsaw Ghetto, Majdanek, Skarżuszko, Buchenwald, and was led on a death march out of Buchenwald. Several of the brothers went into hiding in various attics and bunkers. And the amazing thing is that all 7 siblings survived. This town had about 3,500 Jews before the war, the little town of Żarki in Poland. Only 27 were known to have come home, and it was mostly our family. And so Survivors Club, we chose that name because this is this elite group of lucky survivors. None of them knew which path would lead to survival, and somehow all 7 paths led to survival. And I wanted to make sure the name reflected this, sort of honored this group of survivors in my dad's family. So many kids that survived Auschwitz experienced so much trauma afterwards, even because they had nobody. And my dad had this rich network of family, rich in family, but penniless, otherwise penniless. But where it mattered, they were still rich. So.
Got it. So as you did the research for this book, what was like the most, I guess the entire story is heartbreaking, but what were some of the heartbreaking moments as you uncover thing that really kind of crippled you and like, oh my God, like he really went through this? If you don't mind sharing some of that.
Yeah. So when I started writing, I thought that the book would end at that moment of liberation that's pictured on the front of the book, that moment where my father is finally free. That's where the story ends, right? But in talking to him, once he began to really open up, I realized he had a real struggle after that too. And he had never told anybody. My mom knew, but nobody else knew. After the war, my dad, his grandma, his aunts and uncles, everybody ended up in Germany. seems like a weird place to go if you're, a survivor, back to Germany. But actually, there were DP camps that were set up, displaced persons camps that were set up. The Red Cross and other relief organizations had bases there, and they helped people. So he ended up in Germany for several years. And while he was there, he was bullied, antagonized, beat up because he was Jewish, because he was different. He had trouble growing hair from the malnutrition he had suffered at Auschwitz. And his mom, my grandma Sophie, was trying to make ends meet the best she could. She didn't have an education. She barely spoke the German language. So she was buying and selling things on the black market, and, just to survive. And so she would not come home some nights. She would do her work late at night. And my father was afraid that he would lose her all over again, as he had for a time during, when he was in Auschwitz. He lost his father, he lost his brother, and they were murdered at Auschwitz. And so he lived with that fear. So one day he was hitchhiking to his aunt and uncle's. His mom said, well, go to Aunt Sesha's for the night. So he was hitchhiking there, and he was picked up he was accosted. He was sexually assaulted. And it was something,
Wow.
I just thought, insult to injury is an understatement. My father survived Auschwitz to then be re-traumatized. And I also there are certain things that stick with me. My father talking about having to root through the trash at Auschwitz. He would sneak into the trash can looking for moldy potato peels to eat. And today, my dad makes sure, if we're out, he's out with the grandkids, they've got triple dessert. They, how dare I not give them a third dessert? How dare I make them suffer? And here's my dad who at, their ages was rooting through the trash for survival. It's really hard to hear. I know him as the proud papa on the sidelines of the soccer games, shouting the loud and embarrassing the kids at their graduations. And, and to connect the dots to that boy on the front of the book is hard for me. Yeah, it was hard.
Okay.
The 7 family members still alive today?
So my grandma Sophie is gone. She died in the late 80s, and her brothers and sisters are all gone now. There's one neighbor who was probably our best source for the book. His name is Marvin Zborowski. And no, I knew all the aunts and uncles for the most part. They were alive in my lifetime, but they all died in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. But Marvin Zborowski was my grandma Sophie's neighbor, next door neighbor. He said it was almost like they were all family. And he died, unfortunately, just a year ago. But he shared so many stories with me that are laid out in the book. And one of them is that, my dad, it's hard for him. He doesn't really remember his own father. He said goodbye to him at the gates of Auschwitz, hoping, they'd all see each other again. And they were never reunited. He barely remembers his brother. And Marvin was able to share stories about his father and shared with us that his father was actually viewed as a hero in their town. He had set up a bribery scheme, and he was bribing this particular Nazi guard to make conditions more bearable for everybody, all of the Jews in Zarki. So that was, we're lucky that we have had the ability to talk to so many survivors in my lifetime. And while my father did not speak, my grandma Sophie did. She would tell us stories. And one aunt did not tell stories, but she told stories to our cousin, who she viewed more as a peer because she was older. So I've been able to piece together so much. And as a journalist, it's difficult because we like our two sources and we like everything verified. And so many of my sources are gone now. So that was a little bit difficult. And I had to put that into the prologue of the book and just explain, you have to understand, I did my best with what we had. But there are some holes I'll never be able to fill in, and some things I'll never be able to double verify. And that's something we had to live with, as we put this together.
Yeah. I mean, even with the holes, great story. Must say, great story.
Yeah. I mean, there were so many stories that didn't even make the cut, that we took out. And when we went, the plan was never to publish this widely. The plan was to self-publish it. I had a deal in place with a self-publisher. I was going to pay to publish it. I had done a lot of research and talked to a lot of different self-publishing companies. And right before I pulled the trigger on that, a family friend, actually a former rabbi who is an author, said, you know what? Reach out, try to get an agent, because an agent can get you, might be able to get you, published, professionally. So I thought, you know what, let's give it a try. I'm not going to try that hard because I'm okay with having this in a drawer for the kids, the grandkids and the great grandkids one day and all of that. That's okay. I'm okay with that, And so I reached out to 6 different agents, and I got pretty much immediate responses. Sorry, not interested. And then one person reaches out, this woman, Irene Goodman, and she says, I'm halfway through your manuscript, but I can tell you right now, I want to sign you guys. She said, come in, as long as you're in the New York area anyway, might as well meet in person. So she set up an appointment to come in the next week, and we come in, and she goes, I can't believe this. She said, I reached out to some publishers and said, just so you know, Michael Bornstein and his daughter are going to be in my office this morning if anyone wants to swing by. And she said, a agent right away is on his way, or a book publisher is on his way over from Simon and Schuster, and one from Macmillan, and then the book ended up in a bidding war between 3 of the biggest publishers in the country: Simon and Schuster, Little Brown, and Macmillan. And it was something we never anticipated. I was very ready to pay money to see this published, and within 1 week, we had this, bidding war for the book. And when it was published, week 1, it ended up on the New York Times bestseller list. So we call that a miracle too. We were surprised. We didn't know if there'd still be interest, hearing these stories.
And can you repeat that? You said the 3 largest.
Yeah, 3 of the biggest. I don't know who's the official biggest right now, but 3 of the largest publishers in the country ended up fighting for the manuscript, which was incredibly exciting. That was Simon and Schuster, Little Brown, and Macmillan. So we found ourselves, when they walked into these meetings, initially they walked into this conference room, we were like, all right, ready with our talking points and how to sell them on Survivors Club. And the next thing we know, they're trying to sell us on why they would do such a good job editing and publishing. And we were like, oh my God, our heads were ready to explode. It was really exciting.
That's one of my favorite features. But how did you decide on which publisher to go with? Like, what was it that they said or offered that you were like, this is us. This is the person that we want to be with, or the company we want to be with? In the
back of our minds, we just had a really great feeling about this man, Wes Adams, the editor at Macmillan. We just felt he recognized that this was our baby, and this wasn't just like any old project. He seemed to care as much as we did about the integrity of Survivors Club. And so we were really hoping that he would come in with the highest offer, but we also thought if he didn't, it'll probably still be him too. And in the end, just P.S., there's like no money in book publishing. It's not like we walked away, and we're like, we'll never work another day in our lives. It wasn't that. But they did manage to squeak out the highest offer, and it didn't matter in the end. It was really about going with the publisher where we felt the safest, where we did think they would sort of try to encourage changes that felt the integrity of the book was diminished in any way. I mean, all 3 would have done an excellent job. In the end, I think it really just came down to connection. We really felt a strong connection with them.
Awesome. Are there any intentions of maybe, sharing the story of your father after, surviving the Holocaust? Like, having his grandkids go to soccer games, being a part of the family. Is there a follow-up book that we can expect, that continues the story? Because I think the story afterwards is just as important.
It's so interesting that you asked that. Well, for the paperback, we did update some things. One is that there weren't just 11 grandkids, there were 12 by the time the paperback version came out. So we have done a little bit and some other updates, but some other things that we've learned, we've added into it. I did a pitch for a follow-up book, and I talked to Wes about it, the editor, and he said he really loved it, but he said he took it back to all of his people and they felt we're too close to it, that we care so much. But he's like, I don't know if there's enough appetite, for a follow up. So, I mean, I still have that pitch sitting there. Who knows? Maybe I'll push it again one day. But for now, we're just grateful that this is out there. One of the things that we added into the paperback, actually, two really important things that we added. One is throughout my research, I really wanted to find something tangible for my dad to remember his brother. We forgot to ask my grandma Sophie before she passed what was his birthday. That's just not something that came up and that we can mark the day, And I found birth certificates for everyone else in the family. I never found Samuel's. But right before the hardcover came out, so it was too late to update anything there, I was in contact with a researcher in the northern UK. And she said, I've been doing my own research here on this little community in Jarkey. And she said, I'm in contact with this man whose dad owned the only photography studio in the area before, during, and just after the war. And this son of the photographer, who's an old man himself now, is sitting on a treasure trove of photo negatives that have never been shared before publicly. And she said, but I got him to agree to share them with me. And she said, I have got hundreds and hundreds of these photo negatives from that time period. You want to take a look? And we looked and we looked and we looked and we found my dad's brother, Samuel. And we included that in the paperback. And it's eerie. It's a picture of Samuel with my grandma, Sophie. It looks exactly like my father. It looks exactly like my brother. It looks a lot like my son. It's just so crazy so for my father to have that photo. I was sidelined at my son's swim meet at the time, and I was just killing time looking through these photo negatives, and I was like, my God, that's Grandma Sophie. And I'm like, oh my God, that looks like my father. But you could see the date. It's not my father. It was before my father was born. Marvin Zborowski confirmed it was Samuel for us. And I screenshotted it and I sent it to my father. And I called him with all this noise in the background. I said, Dad, I think I found him. And he looked and he started crying. He never cries. And then I called and I said, I can't talk because Jack's about to swim. And I hung up and I called back 10 minutes later and he's like, Mom and I are at Kinko's. We're having it blown up full size. So he was really excited about that find. And the other thing that we added in is that right after Survivors Club was very first published in 2017, we had set up a website and this woman reaches out and writes to my father and says, I'm the little girl sitting next to you on the front of the book. And we started talking to her and we were able to find out that there was another survivor who lives nearby, also pictured with them at Liberation. And all three of them, Tova Friedman, Sarah Ludwig, and my father were reunited about 2 months after that. They could have these three kids pictured in this very famous image from the liberation of Auschwitz, could have lived anywhere in the whole world after the war. And would you believe they have been living just miles apart in New Jersey for decades? And never reached it.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was really surprised.
That's
So we
amazing.
included that update in the paperback version. Yeah.
Awesome.
Nice. I'm curious. What would you say was the hardest part about just gathering all of that information? Like I happen to be someone really interested in history. I would consider myself like an amateur historian myself, I guess. But when like gathering primary sources, like having to talk through, I imagine the difficulty of having to meet, because like in this case, some of your primary sources are people who went through that trauma.
Yeah.
So having to like have those discussions and like revisit those details, I guess I'm assuming that actually might be the most difficult thing.
It was,
I guess what I would ask.
definitely. No, it's a good question. I would say that it was the most difficult because I'm asking people to relive the worst part of their lives. And for the most part, the survivors I talk to live wonderful, thriving, happy lives. And to ask them to sit down and spend hours with me talking and sort of going back in time, I was so grateful for their time. That's just, there's nothing more important than those primary sources. So I was incredibly grateful for that. And the interviews took a really, really long time because they're older. Most of those sources are well into their 90s. And they want to talk on their timetable and on their, so it was very difficult I
Yeah.
would come in with something specific, like specific the areas I wanted to focus on. When Zarki was first, liquidated, or the arrival at Auschwitz, and they want to tell you things the way they want to tell them to you. And I had to set aside my timetable and my focus. And sometimes by just shutting up and listening, I learned a lot more, and that's where I got the best nuggets of information. But it's hard for me. You can see I'm a talker, to like just shut up and listen. So it was an amazing process. I have met people that feel like family to me, and those relationships are incredibly special to me. And then when you did find one source that then backs up a second source, that was super exciting. So Marvin tells me about this, hero status of my grandpa. And I'm like, that's really amazing, but I want to, I wish I knew more. And he pointed me in the direction. He said, I'm pretty sure this other survivor wrote about it. He made it to Israel, and it's in Hebrew. He said, but you can look. And I was able to find, just a blurb was translated into English, and I was able to like track down what it was. It's called Kechilat Zarki, the destruction of Zarki. It's a collection of essays from survivors who made it to Israel. So I ordered it in Hebrew, and then I found this lovely woman, also in her 90s, who belongs to my temple. She's an Israeli immigrant, and she sat with me and just translated the book for me, and was able to verify even more stories, many stories about my grandpa having used that bribery scheme to help save people. And I will not ever forget this one line that, because she was she was translating slowly. It was a very slow process. And she said, hold on, I think she saw his name, the name Bornstein. And I said, that was the name she knew she had to watch for. She said, hold on, I think I'm getting to something. And she said, the author wrote, many men who were fated to die are alive today because of Israel Bornstein. And I was like, oh my God, that's him. And then it went on to outline, this scheme that he had. And the many times he came in and helped save people. And that was really, really great to have two sources, and there were several occasions like that where I was like, the worlds like collide, like I've got
Coming
yeah,
together.
exactly. So that always felt really good. Yeah.
Awesome. Are there any sources that you wished had the opportunity to see the published book?
Oh,
'Cause I know that, you mentioned
yes.
that, a few people passed in the 90s before the 2000s, and this was published after the 2000s.
Yeah.
So is there anyone that you were like, I wish they had the opportunity to
Yeah.
read this, that was a
Oh
source?
my gosh, yes. My grandma Sophie, she did talk about the Holocaust, never in front of my father. She would come and stay with us for like a month at a time, sometimes from Florida. And so my dad would be at work all day, and we'd come home from school, and she would tell us things. It was almost like we couldn't stop talking about the Holocaust sometimes. And I wish she knew, like, that people care. Look, it's in a book, and people bought it, and people care. Like, because she would just talk and talk to us, and it was like she wanted some kind of, I think she wanted to know it would never be forgotten, I wish so much. I believe her hand was in this, though, throughout. I do. That I'm not highly religious, but I am, I guess, kind of spiritual, or more so lately, throughout the process. And I do feel her hand was in this. When all those publishers showed up and were interested, I'd like to believe that she knows. And her brothers and sisters, I think, I talked to their children, and they're really happy that their parents' stories are remembered. And it's cathartic, I think, for all of us to see it in print, to see our family story in print. So.
Awesome. So I want to ask one more question about the book, and then maybe we'll touch upon what's currently happening in today's climate, which I think Dervin has a few different questions or topics. But I know your book was a New York Times bestseller, and I'm sure that wasn't the purpose of the book or writing the book. But besides of getting all of these stories, put on paper for your kids' kids and your next generation to read, did you accomplish everything that you wanted to accomplish with this book that you created with your father? Was there anything that you wish that you weren't able to succeed in when you initially had this vision?
I think I can say mission accomplished. But I view it as a living, breathing thing. And I intend, if I find more information, and I'm always, when I travel different countries, I'm always looking to, I always take the Jewish tours to see, maybe I'll learn some new nugget, or, um, I intend to keep updating as I learn more information. So I can't say, I guess I could say the mission is accomplished, except that, I always keep the door open if I'm able to learn more information, or I go to a lot of events where there are other second generation survivors, and sometimes they tell me things that help lead me to new research. So as long as I can keep updating, I will definitely keep updating, and I'm grateful again to have a publisher that cares about that.
Awesome. And I do love this section of the book where there are like these pictures of different things. I don't want to show them all off yet because I want readers to read it. But as you continue to update the book, it would be amazing if you can include more pictures about, what happened, historical events.
Yeah.
Because I love that you're updating it as you get more information to make it as relevant as possible. So that's awesome.
Yeah. The photos are, not only did, my father survive and the aunts and uncles survive, but so many photos survived because of those few uncles who went into hiding. They took briefcases of photos with them. So, and thanks to Ancestry DNA, or I think it was Ancestry DNA, we have connected with another branch of the family tree that escaped to Belgium.
Wow.
My grandpa Israel, he had a first cousin who made it to Belgium, and he made it to Belgium with a stack of photos. And his granddaughter Sonia, who speaks French, but she speaks a little bit of English, she reached out. She was able to find us, and she said, we thought she was not. She'd read the book. The book was published in French too. We thought she had just read the book and was saying, well, she has a similar last name or something, but we really didn't think she was related to us. And then she sent us this photo of my grandma as a teenager, and we were like, oh my God, dating my grandpa. And we're like, yeah, we are related. That's pretty cool. So, so that's been neat.
That's pretty cool. That's awesome. Technology. I recently did Ancestry and found some cousins and relatives throughout that process. So I do think it's a very powerful
It is. I'm a little worried my battery's a little low. Can I pause for 1 second and just grab a charger?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, no Ancestry for me.
I remember you talking about it. Your thoughts on that.
I don't really trust it, but there is alternative ways, like just gathering documentation from your mother and father's side, and tracking archives, things of those sorts, which take longer. But be surprised how far back some documentation goes.
Okay. Okay, let's see if I can make this still sit up. Oh no, that's going to be the problem. Let's see if this will stay. Stay! Hold on. Does that look straight enough? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, looks straight. Perfect. All right, Dervin, I'll kick it off to you.
So, I've got three questions. Are you familiar with the term mass psychosis?
Mass psychosis? I'm not familiar with it. I've certainly heard it, but I'm not familiar with it enough to assume that it's anything other than just people following one, like kind of what's happening in the country a little bit right now.
I guess some folks would describe it as when a large part of a society focuses its attention to a leader or leaders or a series of events, and their attention focuses on one small point or issue, or should I say targeted issue, basically like a epidemic of madness, some would say. In your I guess in what I'm trying to lead to, I guess I'm curious as to how some of the folks you connected with described what I guess that mass psychosis was like leading up to just this like tragic period of time where people seem to be almost like in a psychosis, blindly or not blindly, just kind of being fueled with so much hate to do such a thing. It's the only way. But
Yeah.
I'm just
So I've
as
done
someone
a
who
lot of research on that and have my own thoughts on that. But in terms of what other people have said, most of my research centered around Poland. And in Poland, well, there was anti-Semitism for sure, but there was not this blind, following of a leader because Hitler rose to power right next door in Germany. And so while Polish people were aware of what was happening in Germany, I think that they didn't really believe it was coming to their doorstep until it literally came to their doorstep. So I don't think they were as aware. So I didn't spend as much time talking to my sources about that and how this could have happened. But I've certainly researched it a lot, and it hits me. Your question hits me because I think about what we are seeing in our own country today, and some of this, blind faith and this belief that I alone can fix it, that one man or, one party or one, can fix one, and this demonization of different things, whether it be immigration or, I think back to what did happen in Germany and the scapegoating. And, I remind people that the Holocaust didn't start with burning bodies. It started with jokes about Jewish people in Der Stürmer magazine. It started. Are you guys frozen? You look frozen to me.
No, we're hearing you.
Okay.
We're listening.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So the Holocaust didn't start with burning bodies. It started with jokes, and it started with graffiti on walls and broken glass, and it started with trashing Jewish businesses, creating laws that made it hard for Jewish people to even conduct business or to own land, or to own property, and marginalizing a group. And I think we are seeing pieces of that. I mean, COVID-19, suddenly it wasn't safe for Asian Americans to get on New York City subways. Immigration, suddenly there was a huge rise in discrimination against Hispanic people or Muslim people. I mean, according to the Anti-Defamation League, hate crimes or hate incidents involving Jews are up 34% last year alone, the highest number recorded on record since the ADL started tracking this back in the early 1970s. That should scare us all. A rise in hate crimes against Black people, LGBTQ minorities. We are normalizing hatred. And that's kind of what we saw, that mass psychosis, I guess. That's sort of a piece of that mass psychosis you mentioned, back in Germany in the 1930s. It just became normal to scapegoat and hate.
Yeah, definitely. I can't help but think what seemed to consistently, I guess, desensitize people, so to speak, to it.
Exactly.
The reason for my question is, as someone who appreciate history, I try to learn from it as much as I can. And it's like when you feel, I guess, similarities in terms of the mass psychosis, for example, and it could worry you,
My dad gets asked the question sometimes, do you think a Holocaust could happen again? And it always scares me to hear him say, yeah. He says, I don't know that it'll necessarily be a Holocaust against Jewish people. It could be against, Muslim people. It could be against Black people. It could be against, Asian people. But he believes that those same things that existed in society still exist today, and it worries him that we're forgetting the past,
Yeah.
I absolutely agree.
And I'll just preface this. I'm not a huge historian, but I kind of know a little bit of things. But and you can correct me if I'm correct, but I'm pretty sure that there were sections in Africa or countries in Africa where there were groups that killed other groups because they look different. I don't know if it was apartheid, but I feel that happened after the Holocaust. So I mean, those things happen all the time. It feels like to
Yes,
me.
that's absolutely true. And, we've seen it in the Middle East in places. Yes,
Yeah.
there are examples.
So maybe not at the
Yeah,
scale, maybe not at the
yeah,
scale and how many other countries were
yeah.
impacted, but
And there was
I
an
feel we see
Armenian
it in very small
genocide. There
pockets.
was an Armenian genocide. There
Yeah.
are, you know, treatment, the treatment of humans in Rwanda. There are many
Mm-hmm.
examples of cruelty, torture, and essentially Holocaust, mini Holocaust. I think what makes the Holocaust of the 1940s so important to remember is just the scale on which it happened. Who could
Yeah.
ever have
The,
thought that 6 million people could be killed? 6 million Jews. I mean, other people
yeah.
killed as well, could be killed in such a short period of time. That mass, even before the actual death camps were created or turned into death camps. I was talking to one survivor. His name is
Mm-hmm.
Michael Silberman, and he was taken. He and his mom and dad were taken to the town is Chelnov. It's called Chelnov, this town.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, there was no real official mass extermination. So what they did is they would line everybody up and they would put you in the back of the trucks, and then they would take the exhaust pipe and they would route it into the back of the truck and close the door and seal it. And you would drive around for 30 minutes and you would open the door and everybody would be dead. And that's how he lost the rest of his family. And his mom said to him, run, just run. They were getting on. She said, just run. And he ran and he ran and he ran into the woods. And he never saw his mother again, but he survived. How does any human, to use Dervin's words, how do you become so desensitized to death that you're okay with put the exhaust in, that's a good idea, put the exhaust in the back, and then just that's such a smart idea. I mean, that conversation was had. What a smart idea! Let's do that. I don't know, but it's scary. Yeah.
Crazy.
But what drives me crazy a bit is not a bit, a ton is it seems like a con to I guess our collective nature at times is this want to be led, and sometimes I'd say the wrong individuals, like Hitler, or a King Leopold, or something like that, could galvanize such a people to ignore obvious wrongs.
I think we have to do a better job of teaching independent thinking. And I say that as someone with my own strong opinions that I force on my children. But I also, in my moments of clarity, I'm like, no, they need to form their own opinions too. And I am trying to teach them to watch the news more critically. Just because somebody's wearing a suit doesn't mean that they are the moral authority on something, or because they're well spoken does not mean that they know what they're talking about, or that they're saying something that's rational. And we have to, I think, do a better job of teaching young people to trust their gut sense as opposed to just blindly following, well, everybody else in my school and everybody else, in my family believes this, or everybody else in my town believes this. I was just out recently campaigning myself because for some of the reasons that we're talking about, I decided to run for school board. I never saw myself running for an elected position before, but this year it felt really important. And so I'm proud to say I won on the election November 8th. Thank you. Thanks very much.